It's always scary to press the start streaming button. Okay, let's see. Is it working? I don't see it. It says I'm live, but I don't see it. And nobody's watching, so that's good. One moment. Oh, here we go. Okay, if anybody's here right now, sorry, technical difficulties. Still figuring this out. Okay. Okay, I believe this is working. Okay. All right, we're going to do it. Welcome, my hordes and hordes of viewers. Let's watch some Andrew Yang. Okay, so I haven't seen this yet. This came out on Sunday. I've seen like little clips here and there. I've seen this intro like 1,000 times now because of trying to set it up. But beyond that, the vast majority of this I have not seen yet. So this is going to be a mostly blind watch, and and then we're going to see what happens. All right, Andrew Yang looking as good as always. Let's do it.
Welcome back from Washington. We are live for back-to-back CNN Democratic presidential town halls. I'm Ana Cabrera, and we've just heard from Marianne Williamson. Now it is Andrew Yang's turn. Yang is a businessman who has become successful as a tech executive. He is a former ambassador for global entrepreneurs.
By the way, if anybody's watching this right now, I'd really appreciate it if you let me know that everything's working correctly, because I don't know what I'm doing. So it'd be nice. Thank you.
Worship under the Obama administration, and if elected, Yang would make history as the first Asian American president. In our audience tonight, Democrats and independents who say they plan to participate in the Democratic primaries and caucuses. Please welcome Andrew Yang.
Yeah, that was a really funny post.
So I saw recently that you were proposing potentially doing some campaigning via hologram. In fact, I think we have a little example. You're testing it out here with the hologram of Tupac, you rapping your hologram.
Yes.
Rapping there with him.
Look at how nerdy he looks.
As you can see, I'm giving him a run for his money.
I'm actually, in all seriousness, wondering, are you campaigning anywhere else right now?
How do you know it's me in this chair? Right now, this is the only place I am.
Well, we're glad to have you, and we have a lot of great questions for you. Let's begin. We have Emily Benson here. She lives here in Washington and works for a nonpartisan think tank. Emily, go ahead.
Artificial intelligence has contributed to job automation, leading to significant job losses in multiple sectors. How do you propose regulating AI to ensure continued human employment? And what do you propose in terms of reskilling programs to keep Americans competitive in the computer and machine age?
I think I'm going to keep doing, like, at least some of the time I'm going to come in with my own answer or my own like analysis before Yang's answer, then we'll see what he says. Basically, this is a really interesting question, I think. AI is obviously a big part of Yang's whole platform, so I like this question as the first question. I was kind of worried that CNN was gonna like kind of shaft him a little bit. I've heard we might see some of that later on in the town hall, but so far it seems fine.
What a phenomenal question, and this is in many ways one of the key challenges we're facing as a country. We have to face why Donald Trump won the election of 2016. he won by the numbers because we'd automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, Iowa, all the swing states he needed to win and did win. And I have many friends who work in technology, and they know that what we did to the manufacturing jobs, we are now going to do to the retail jobs, the call center jobs, the fast food jobs, and most disastrously, the trucking jobs in the days to come. So we need to think much bigger about how we're going to help Americans transition through this time. And if you look at the data around retraining and education programs, unfortunately, they tend to be
0 to 15. Everybody knows, right?
largely ineffective for many displaced workers. The effectiveness rate for manufacturing workers with federally funded retraining programs are between 0 and 15%. So we need to think bigger about how we're going to help Americans transition. And my flagship proposal, which many of you have probably heard of, is a freedom dividend of $1,000 per month for every American adult starting at age 18. This would create 2 million new jobs in our economy. It would make children and families stronger and healthier, and would help tens of millions of Americans transition through what is the greatest economic and technological transformation in our country's history, which is what we're going through right now.
Mr. Yang, we'll talk a little bit more about the
I thought that was good. I thought some people were going to cheer, but not so far. Let's see.
freedom
Let's see if they
dividend
warm
here in
up.
just a moment. But let me just follow up with you. You have said you can't stop automation. Don't even try. But why not intervene?
Well, if you look at it, you don't think about 30% of American malls closing in the next 4 years as an automation or AI problem. But then when you trace the steps, Amazon is sucking up $20 billion in commerce every year, and that's what's causing 30% of malls and stores to close. And if you go to an Amazon fulfillment center, you see it's wall-to-wall robots, and they're investing billions of dollars in AI. So it's very, very difficult to stop this process. We have to instead think about how we can make Americans prosperous through this time. The goal should not be to save jobs. The goal should be to make our lives better.
Okay, let's.
That's a great answer. Just to add to that, I guess, from an economic perspective, it's about you can think about it in two different ways. So one way is efficiency, like making the pie bigger, and then another way is equity, so making the pie fairly allocated, right? So having increases in automation make the pie much bigger. It's much more efficient, generally speaking, and really from there, it's all just a matter of getting the right allocation, getting a decently fair allocation. So, I mean, AI, especially in many different industries, like self-driving cars, for example, it should not only be way more efficient, but save thousands and thousands of lives. So we should keep going. We just need to allocate the gains more effectively.
Get to our next audience question. This is David Hahn. He is a lawyer working for the Department of Veterans Affairs and is a supporter of yours, Mr. Yang. He
Yes.
has a question about your. He has a question about the freedom dividend. Go ahead, David.
All right. Andrew, when you speak about the cost of basic income, you've indicated that the freedom dividend would be opt-in or otherwise offset by savings from current spending on entitlement programs. What is your message for veterans, disabled persons, and families receiving TANF benefits, specifically with the concern that they might benefit less from the freedom dividend than other Americans would?
So I think this is one of the most substantive criticisms of Yang's UBI proposal, because if the point is to lift up, is to be a progressive policy and to help most Americans, especially the poorest among us, probably, right? So that doesn't really apply there if the way it's currently constructed. So, I mean, there's some counter arguments to that, but let's see what he says.
It's a tremendous question. And the goal is to make an economy that works for everyone, a trickle-up economy from people, families, and communities up. And though the freedom dividend might help certain Americans more than others, depending upon their current benefits, programs, or enrollments, the goal is to make it so that we don't stop necessarily at the freedom dividend. So if someone's a veteran on disability and we see that those benefits are not sufficient, for example, right now, 22 veterans and soldiers are committing suicide every day, which is an incredibly tragic and horrifying figure. And that's the kind of thing we need to put massive resources in place to combat. The freedom dividend does not solve all problems for all people, but hopefully it will move us in the right direction.
So let me ask you.
Wait, so I need to understand what he's saying here and look more into it so that I know what the fuck's going on. He said they can add more. They can add more help to veterans if they need more help. Is that what he said?
Disability, and we see that those benefits are not sufficient. The goal is to make it so that we don't stop necessarily at the freedom dividend. So if someone's a veteran on disability and we see that those benefits are not sufficient, for example, right now, 22 veterans and soldiers are committing suicide every day, which is an incredibly tragic and horrifying figure. And that's the kind of thing we need to put massive resources in place to combat. The freedom dividend does not solve all problems for all people, but hopefully it will move us in the right direction.
Okay, so if I'm understanding that correctly, basically, yeah, it's the freedom dividend, and then it's going to be more help on top of that if it's necessary, right? If they need it. He wasn't like super specific there, but he said allocating like a lot more resources towards that, if I understood that correctly.
So let me ask you, if you're proposing to give every single American adult $1,000 a month, $12,000
That would be so fucking cool, by the way. Like, let's do this, guys. That'd be so fucking cool.
a year after they turn 18, that would include people like Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett. Why do billionaires need the freedom dividend?
This is one of the questions that I heard before I watched this. This is such a stupid fucking question. I mean, maybe I should just let Yang answer it because it's. Okay, I'll just give mine. Billionaires and like super rich people are going to pay for like 5 UBIs, something like this, like many UBIs. So the fact that they're going to get a UBI, like net, they're minus 4 UBIs or more probably. So they're not winning out of this. Like they're losing in this trade, like in this policy, as it should be, because they have too much money as it is. And then if there's a lot of gains to making it universal instead of making it needs based. But he's going to answer that.
Well, if you look at what's going on in our country right now, there's one state that has a dividend of between $1,000 and $2,000 per year, and that state is Alaska, where it's universal, it's funded by a petroleum fund. And so in Alaska, they don't go around saying, hey, are you rich? Then you don't get it. If you're doing worse, then maybe we'll give it to you. And the benefits are enormous because then all Americans can get excited about it as a right of citizenship. You don't have any stigma attached to it. You don't need to frame it as a rich to poor transfer, and you don't need to monitor everyone's income in any given moment in time. So there are massive benefits to making it universal. And in Alaska, it has stood the test of time for almost 4 decades under multiple administrations, where now it's wildly popular, has created thousands of jobs, has improved children's health, and has helped decrease income inequality. So what they're doing in Alaska with oil, we can do for the rest of the country with technology.
But in this,
So just to add real quick, the bureaucracy point I think is really interesting, and I'm probably going to address this in a video as well. But that's like actually one of the conservative arguments for UBI, because it's going to reduce the need for government bureaucracy. So it's a more efficient system. So if you don't like government bloat, or I mean, I think people in general shouldn't like government bloat if it's actually not helping. So yeah, that's just a really good conservative argument for UBI.
scale, obviously, in Alaska is very different than what we're talking about when you're looking at more than 200 million Americans across the country here. How are you going to pay for this?
Well, if you think about who are going to be the biggest winners from AI to the first question, or new technologies or self-driving cars and trucks, it's going to be Amazon, Google, Facebook, Uber, the biggest tech companies in our country. And we all saw, how much did Amazon pay in federal taxes last year? Yeah. They paid less in federal taxes than you all. So when
is this our crowd of Yang fans already?
people ask, how are we going to fund this? We have to go where the money is. We have to implement a new mechanism to get that money back from Jeff Bezos and Amazon and bring it back to the American people to build a trickle-up economy.
Isn't it going to, though, trickle down to the consumer? The price of that is going to trickle down to the consumer, right?
Well, the great thing is I speak to CEOs about this, and they know it's better for their companies if consumers have money to spend. This is capitalism where income doesn't start at zero. And if you can imagine, if you're watching this at home, imagine your life, your family, your community with everyone getting $1,000 a month. Are you going to buy more stuff? Yes. Are you going to go out more often? Yes. You're going to get those car repairs you've been putting off? Yes. And all of that money ends up circulating back through the economy, creating jobs in your community where you live.
Patrick Lichtke is here. He's originally from New York. He's now a student at the George Washington University and is a member of the College Democrats. Patrick.
All right, so after your interview on David Pakman's show, I decided to check out your policy page, and
Pakman.
I noticed it doesn't make much mention of unions. What are your plans for organized labor, particularly in light of the automation crisis?
That's an interesting question. I guess I'll lay out my thoughts real quick on this. So very broadly, I think one of the biggest problems in the country is this huge level of income and wealth inequality. But there are many tools in the tool belt in order to solve that. So we can use minimum wage, we can use unions, we can use taxation, like different different types of taxes, different tax rates. I mean, technically you could use monetary policy there as well, or at least use it to not exacerbate things. But yeah, let's see what Yang thinks.
Yeah. I'm a huge union fan, and this freedom dividend that I'm proposing was actually championed initially by a guy named Andy Stern, who used to run the SEIU. So if you look at his book, it's called Raising the Floor. Imagine the most prominent labor union leader in the country saying the future of labor is no labor, we are screwed, and we need to move to another way of distributing value as fast as possible. So that's Andy Stern. And so because of that, when I sit with union leaders and I say, hey, you know what's going to help your union membership is if you have a dividend of $1,000 a month, because it ends up making it possible for unions to negotiate much harder, since then they have something they can fall back on. So this is a very pro-union plan. I'm a fan of the right to organize. I actually was just with Leslie Smith, a UFC fighter who was fired because she tried to organize, and I've been trying to help her bring her case to here to DC, actually.
Mr. Yang, you.
Just an addendum, because I realized I didn't give a complete answer. So yeah, there's many tools in the tool belt, and that's absolutely true, and we should look at all of them. I'm not married to any particular tool. However, automation may make it so that certain tools are, at the very least, less effective. I think this is part of Yang's argument as well. Like, a higher minimum wage isn't really going to be super useful if there are no jobs, or people just aren't getting hired for the most part. And you could probably say the same thing for labor unions, and maybe a couple of the other tools that I mentioned. And that's one of the main beauties of UBI.
You said of Bernie Sanders' plan in support of unions that it would turn back the clock and it wouldn't work to get fair treatment for workers through unions. Why don't you think that will be the solution?
Well, I'm a huge fan of unions, but we have to face facts where union membership has declined by almost 50% over the last number of decades, and their power has diminished accordingly. And so if we say, look, we're going to magically revive an economy of the 70s where union membership is back to those levels, that's going to be a very, very steep hill to climb. I don't think we have the time to remake the workforce in that way. We should just start distributing value directly to Americans, and this would have a byproduct of making workers and unions stronger.
It's interesting with the time angle on that one, because that's probably true. But another thing, I mean, basically what I just mentioned, and I'm sure he agrees with this, but he didn't mention it here, that like automation will make it so that no matter what, that tactic will probably lose power and be less effective. But he went with the time angle there. So I don't know, just a little bit interesting.
All right, let's bring in Ben Pittler. He works for a property management company here in Washington. Ben, what's your question?
All right. Andrew, we need a candidate or a Democratic nominee who can not only back up their own ideas, but also stand their ground against Donald Trump's bullying tactics and call out his political circus. Prove to us, if you can right now, that you can be emotional, passionate, and articulate to contend with Trump on the debate stage.
Wow, so fun. So when I was in Iowa, someone came up to me and said he cannot wait to see me debate Donald Trump because I'm laser focused on the problems that got him elected, but I'm his polar opposite. And what I've been saying is the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes math. But that said, my team and I have been joking about what Donald Trump's nickname for me will be. And we have come up with Comrade Yang. But the truth is that there's this massive appetite among Americans for solutions that will actually improve their lives. I am getting many, many Trump supporters to join and support my campaign, as well as conservatives, independents, libertarians, and of course, Democrats and progressives. I am the candidate to beat Donald Trump because I'm focused on solving the problems that got him elected in the first place.
All right, we're just getting started.
That's one really interesting angle of this. We can only really speculate on how he's going to do against Trump if he does win the primary. He seems to be resonating with a lot of more conservative people, in a way that the vast majority of Democrats do not. So that's a positive thing for sure. But it's a different beast. I mean, Trump, for all his flaws, one of the things he's really, really good at is, like, I guess debate, but not really debate. It's like looking good to a certain subsection of the population, to think it's like own people, like with the name calling and the bravado and all that stuff. For a lot of people and for certain parts of your brain, like that is really effective. So I'm not sure how Yang will do against that. Bernie, I want to say Bernie will do well against him, but like that's what the poll numbers indicated from 2016. But I'm not sure if I don't know. Some of the polling data has been mixed on that this time around. That polling data might be skewed. It's still very early, so we'll see. I think either way, the Democrat would be favored in 2020, but that's what the prediction markets tell us as well. But it's definitely not dead set. They still give Trump around a 40% chance of winning.
We'll be right back with much more from CNN's Democratic Presidential Town Hall with Andrew Yang. Welcome. Started. We'll be right back with much more from CNN's Democratic Presidential Town Hall with Andrew Yang.
That's kind of awesome, dude.
Welcome back to CNN's live Democratic Presidential Town Hall with Andrew Yang. We're going to get back to our audience questions in just a moment. But let me ask you, because I read your book, and you write in your book, I grew up a skinny Asian kid in upstate New York who was often ignored or picked on, like one of the kids from Stranger Things, but nerdier and with fewer friends.
Sounds familiar.
It stuck with me, you write. How did it stick with you? How did that shape your experience growing up?
Well, it made me always want to stick up for the underdog, the person who was left out or marginalized or ignored. And so when I grew up, one, I'm a Mets fan still, which they're like the perennial underdog. But when I'd go to an event or gathering, I'd naturally find the person who was excluded or left out and try and include them and bring them in. And now I've had a passion for entrepreneurship for the last 20 years. And who's being excluded or marginalized right now in America? Unfortunately, it's the working class Americans who are working two jobs. 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. 57% can't afford an unexpected $500 bill. Our economy is now working for more and more Americans. And now I'm running for president to help change that and make us not the underdogs in our own land anymore.
You are the...
That was a really interesting and effective pivot to that question. You see that? You went from how did your upbringing affect things, and then he's like, oh, I'm for the underdog. And who's the underdog right now? The American people. That's fucking good. That was tight.
Son of Taiwanese immigrants who came to the U.S. in the 1960s. And I know in your immigration plan, you support a pathway to citizenship for all undocumented immigrants currently in this country. But you say, quote, it must reflect the fact that these individuals tried to circumvent our legal immigration system. What do you mean by that?
Well, we have well over 12 million undocumented immigrants here in this country. And to me, the most logical and humane path forward is to create a pathway to citizenship for people who are here undocumented, particularly for the dreamers who really know no other home but the United States of America. And I say to people around the country, I'm the son of immigrants. I believe that immigrants make our country stronger and more dynamic. And so we should try and create a pathway forward to help integrate. Really, again, 12 million is a conservative estimate. There are many, many people who are here and undocumented that we should integrate into our formal economy and society if we can.
But what are you going to do to deter illegal immigration?
Well, so right now we have a migrant crisis on the southern border, and it's in part because the composition of the people who are showing up at the border is changing, where now it's people who are applying for asylum, and unfortunately we don't have the resources to process them in any kind of punctual or effective way, and so the waiting period is literally over a year in some cases. So the basics are that we need to put more resources to work on our southern border. We need more facilities, caseworkers, asylum judges. Right now, our Border Patrol is short thousands of people that they've been trying to hire for months because it's very hard for them to attract and retain people to very remote parts of this country.
Let's turn back to our audience now. And Constance Young.
Let me think about that for a second. Did you notice he didn't answer that first question not directly. Like, it was about what are illegal immigrants. What did you mean by it has to reflect the fact that they try to get around the law? He kind of dodged it. He didn't answer that. I'm interested in what he thinks on that, because I mean, I think logically that's, as long as it's reasonable, that's not the worst thing in the world. Like, if it takes longer for them to become official citizens, for example, I mean, that seems fair. Again, depending on how long it was. But yeah, he didn't really answer that.
She's an activist and speaker here in Washington. Constance, go ahead.
Over the last couple of years, we've seen a resurgence of white nationalist violence. As a survivor of the deadly car attack in Charlottesville, it is important to me that our next president addresses this issue immediately. Please explain how you will work to curtail this problem, and also please explain whether you will support a bill that defines white nationalist violence as terrorism.
This is I have the feeling that this is like a really important question for him to nail, especially given the smears that have been going on against him as him somehow being in cahoots with white nationalists. It's very important that he nails this question. And I feel like the second part, supporting legislation, I mean, I think if you said violence, then yeah, of course that makes sense. If it's the definition of terrorism is political or religious, you can definitely argue it's political. So let's see what he says.
Well, first, congratulations to you, Constance, for your incredible work. Let's give her a round of applause.
Okay, good move.
And what you've been through. If the camera people permitted it, I would run out and give you a hug right now. I'm going to give you a hug in a nice commercial break, because what you've been through sounds incredibly difficult and traumatic. So, to me, right now, this tribalism that's tearing our country apart, it's related to a dysfunctional economy. Because if you feel like you don't have a future and your kids don't have a future, and then someone comes up with this, for example, scapegoating immigrants or hateful ideologies, then you're much more subject to those. So by getting the economic boot off of people's throat, hopefully we can help alleviate this tribalism. I'm inspired by the work of Dia Khan, this filmmaker who engaged in something called anti-hate. And so right now, the temptation for many of us is just to condemn racism and hatred, which we should do because it has no place in our society. But then the next step after that is to actually convince the people that these hateful ideologies are incorrect. And that's more difficult, it's more painstaking, but over time, it's our best path forward to hopefully convince people that there is no place for hate in the United States of America.
Mr. Yang, you may know that.
I think that was good. I think that was good. A good move in the beginning to acknowledge her. That's always a good move. And I mean, at least it felt solid, right? One thing that I think so. So one thing, I don't know if anybody watching has any information on this, because I'm really curious about this question. So he was talking about how like taking the economic boot off of people's throats is going to help them not turn to racism and xenophobia and such. I'm like 93% sure that that's correct, that thesis makes sense, but I'm not 100% sure. So there's been some historical examples, right? Like the Weimar Republic, Germany, massive hyperinflation, and then it turns into Nazis. And generally, the Great Depression turned into this huge rise in like authoritarianism. Are there other historical examples of that? Is there data in the lab of that being true? I don't have a good answer. A friend of mine said the Russian Revolution, maybe, but I think definitely for that's good evidence for like revolution occurring under economic strife, which makes sense, but not so much like racism and xenophobia specifically. Although I mean, perhaps they're related. And I don't know of any studies about this. So yeah, if anybody knows anything, that would be really cool.
But white nationalists are supporting you online. They seem to have seized
Okay, here we go. So no more coyness, like just going straight after it. Let's see what he says.
on some of your statements, which they say are proof that you are particularly concerned about white people. Why do you think they're drawn to your candidacy?
It's been a point of confusion because I don't look much like a white nationalist. The closest thing we could come up with for it was that I sent, I retweeted the New York Times saying that that Americans
I may or may not have featured that in my video.
are dying of opiates in record numbers, so much so that more people are dying than being born. in various communities. And those communities were largely white communities in the Midwest and the South. So I've completely disavowed any of that support. I don't want the support of anyone who has any kind of agenda that's different than the agenda of this campaign. And our slogan is humanity first. We're trying to solve the problems and improve the lives for tens of millions of Americans.
In your book, you do say the group I worry about.
Just real quick, one thing that he has some great slogans, like catchphrases. So humanity first, trickle up economy, or trickle up economics. That's what he says, right? And then there's a third one. Was it human-centered capitalism? There might be. I feel like I'm forgetting one, but he has a lot of like really good slogans. That's very effective, I think, for politics. So that's great.
Most is poor whites. Why are you most concerned about that group, poor?
Okay, several questions on this. He's gonna have to stay strong and like really hit it home on these.
Whites.
Well, in the context of my book, I was suggesting, to Constance's point, like how is this tribalism and violence going to manifest itself? And so the group I was most worried about was poor whites who felt like they had no future, and then that violence would emerge in large part because that group would become increasingly angry and distressed. And so that's the context of the book. But I am most concerned about that group in terms of the nationalism that Constance was describing.
All right, let's turn back to our audience question.
Okay. I think that was fine. He got out of it. He got out of the waters. Yeah, I think that should work, right? I think that answer makes sense.
Questions. Our next guest here is Jose Altamirano. He's a program assistant at Georgetown University. Jose.
Hi, Mr. Yang. Rising healthcare costs and the threat of losing one's insurance is a concern for many Americans. What is your position on Medicare for All, and how do you plan to address the challenge of providing healthcare for over 30 million uninsured Americans?
Another really important question. This has been another point of concern for progressives on Yang. They talk about healthcare a lot and say that he's not actually for Medicare for All. He's for a public option. I'll be honest, I'm not that well informed in this area, so I don't really know like all the differences and stuff. And like I sort of know what a public option is. I sort of know private insurance still exists, and then Medicare for All, if like Bernie's plan would completely eliminate private insurance, but like I'm not 100% sure. So let's see what he says.
It's a great question. It's on the minds of many, many Americans. I'm in the Medicare for All public option camp, generally an applause line in groups like this. No? Right now, we're spending twice as much on our health care to worse effects than other countries. We're spending 18% of GDP. And one of the things that is confusing about this is people are like, where are you going to get the money? Which is completely incorrect. We're spending twice as much on other countries. If we channel our existing resources and negotiate lower drug prices, lower rates, we can get the access up and the prices down and make it so that the people that are struggling, it is immoral that in the richest, most advanced economy in the world, we are more stressed out
in the history of the world
about navigating our Byzantine dysfunctional healthcare system when our loved ones get sick or injured than we are actually caring for them and helping them get well.
Okay, so he said Medicare for All public option, which I kind of thought was not. Well, I thought those were originally mutually exclusive, but I believe his position is that he wants to have a basically Medicare, the government provided healthcare that old people get. He wants that for everybody, or that to be an option for everyone. That's the public option. And then if they don't want that, if they want to keep their private insurance, then that's fine. He's not going to eliminate private insurance companies. That's what Bernie's plan is. I think that's right. Is that right? Did I understand that right? Let's see. Question: how does your channel not have more subs? Looking forward to seeing you grow. Solid content. Thank you. Appreciate that. I don't know. I only made a few videos so far, and hoping it turns around, or it keeps growing. But we'll see. I'll do my best. But appreciate that. Thank you. And okay.
Let me bring in now Emmett Ryan. He's a student at the University of Maryland. Go ahead, Emmett.
Mr. Yang, like your son, I am on the autism spectrum. And while I kind of speak for other Americans on the same spectrum, I can say with confidence that I'd like to not be speaking here today without support. The same support that the Trump administration has.
Wait, I didn't catch that.
Other Americans on the same spectrum, I can say with confidence that I'd like to not be speaking here today without support. The same support that the Trump administration has tended to cut funding for. Would you be able to elaborate on your plan to protect these programs, along with other programs that currently don't receive any federal funding?
Yeah, so in case you hadn't gathered, like Emmett, my older son is on the autism spectrum, and my wife and I figured that out when he was turning 4, and it was a massive relief to us because as first-time parents, you don't know if you're, it's like maybe this is perfectly normal, maybe we're just terrible parents. Like a lot of things go through your minds, but then when we realized that he was on the autism spectrum, it's been this tremendous journey for our family, and I know what families go through. We need to dramatically redouble and invest in helping families with children who are developmentally different or neurologically atypical. And as a parent of someone who is atypical, I now think atypical is the new typical. And so we need to be able to do more for those families. And as president,
that doesn't really make sense, but I like logically if you look at it technically. But anyway,
it would
I get
champion
the
a
gist.
federal
I agree with the
program
gist.
to help funnel money into the schools, in our communities, and make sure that that burden's not on the states. This is a federal responsibility and a federal initiative I will be thrilled to lead. So thank you for your question, Emmett.
You say. And I think this is a really important follow-up question because I know this is such a personal issue to you. You say you want to destigmatize autism. How would you do that?
Well, part of it is just that I'm so open talking about it. I'm fairly confident I am not the first politician or even presidential candidate with autism in their family, but for whatever reason, it's swept under the rug as something to be ashamed of, which to me makes absolutely no sense. I'm very proud of my son, and anyone who has someone on the spectrum in their family feels the exact same way. So that's for starters. But number two, then if we invest these resources, because right now part of the stigma is you feel like you have to provide more for your kid, and then you go to the public school and they're like, well, we can't help your kid. And then you end up feeling marginalized through that process, and your child does too. So if they show up to that public school and say, hey, great news, here's this whole suite of resources for your child, then we can alleviate the stigma in the most important way, which is actually when the parent shows up to the school with their child.
Andrew Yang, thank you.
Yeah, that was good. Is this halfway? Halftime? Just an interesting related thing. I recently listened to a Tyler Cowen Conversations with Tyler podcast with, I forget the researcher's name, a woman that was like, the whole podcast is about autism. Super interesting. I realized now that that doesn't give you enough information to look it up. Sorry, it was good though. And it talks about a lot of this, and I'm going to butcher if I try to give details, but it was just really interesting.
For staying with us, we'll be right back with much more from CNN's Democratic Presidential Town Hall.
He looks comfortable out there. That's really good.
Welcome back to CNN's live Democratic Presidential Town Hall with Andrew Yang. We're going to jump right to our next question from Chris Carey. He's a student at Catholic University, a member of the College Democrats, and currently interns for the House Ways and Means Committee. Chairman Richard Neal. Go ahead, Chris.
With such terrible acts as the Parkland shooting happening with more frequency in recent years, what concrete legislative steps would you promote as president in order to ensure the safety of the United States, as well as protecting Second Amendment rights?
Yes.
Quick, my own opinion here. I don't have a strong opinion on what exact policy should be put forth, but I do have a strong opinion on like how much we prioritize these events. I mean, obviously they're terrible events, but if you just look at the amount of people affected compared to most other major issues, like take the war on drugs, like thousands more affected by the war on drugs than school shootings. I mean, obviously it's still terrible. We should try to get rid of it, but it's just a lack of prioritization that I don't agree with.
As a parent, I can only imagine what children are experiencing when they go to school and actually have to worry about doing drills for school shootings. And I was horrified, like many other Americans, with the Parkland shooting and the other shootings, particularly in schools around the country, but also in public areas. So I am pro-gun safety. I think that we should treat guns in a very similar way to the way we treat motor vehicles, where you have to get licensed and test because vehicles can kill people. And firearms do the same thing. And so we should be having federal background checks around mental illness and criminal records and domestic violence and other background elements that would make it problematic for someone to have access to a gun. Now, it's going to be very, very difficult to come to agreement because many Americans feel very strongly about this on both sides. So in parallel to this, I would invest in a massive mental health initiative, because if we can help get mental health resources into the hands of more Americans, we can address some of these incidents of gun violence before they happen. My brother is a psychology professor, and I know that we can do much, much more. We have a mental health crisis in this country, and we need to rise to the challenge and address it.
So I really like that answer. One thing on this issue that has always bothered me is, I mean, this happens all the time in politics. It's unfortunate, but it's how it is. The Democrats say it's all guns. It's all because of guns, and the Republicans say it's all because of mental health. And obviously, those are both stupid positions. It's like a combination. Like, life is complicated. These things are complicated. Somebody doesn't, like, just because you have a gun doesn't mean you go and shoot up a school. And just because, but also on the other side, like you need to have access to a gun to be able to commit that kind of level of violence. So, yeah, I like that answer.
Your gun safety plan just a little bit more. You mentioned background checks. I know you want people to have safety classes. It would require a gun lock or a trigger lock purchases among these different tiers in order to get that license. You know, many gun advocates will note that, sure, people who are law-abiding citizens would follow through, but maybe not criminals. How would you address that?
Yeah, and this is one of the central challenges. There are over 300 million firearms in this country, the vast majority of which are held by law-abiding Americans. We're the most heavily armed society in the history of the world, and any laws you pass are going to be obviously much more adhered to by Americans who follow the law than criminals. And so this is one of the points of contention that makes agreement very, very hard to come to. But I'm convinced that there's a consensus around common sense gun legislation that responsible gun owners and people who are gun safety advocates can agree on.
Okay, let's get right back to our audience questions. With
Quick tidbit on that. I think something crazy like 90% of Americans support universal background checks on guns. But for some reason we can't pass it because our political situation is terrible.
Zakiya Jones, she's a student at Trinity Washington University, originally from Ohio. Go ahead, Zakiya.
How do your ideas on the decriminalization of opioids differentiate between addicted individuals and drug suppliers?
So this is one of the questions that I saw beforehand, and it kind of blew up a little bit. People saying that he's stupid. I actually think he doesn't go too far enough, which is funny. But okay, let's see his answer.
It's a tremendous question, and I was put on to the need to decriminalize opioids. First, they're the facts, where 8 Americans are dying of drug overdose every hour. This is a plague, and it's so bad that it's actually reduced our nation's life expectancy for the last 3 years. Drug overdoses and suicides have overtaken vehicle deaths as causes of death in America. Now, the federal government was complicit in enabling this opiate epidemic because the government stood by while Purdue Pharma dispensed hundreds of thousands of OxyContin prescriptions as a non-addictive wonder drug, and now we're all grappling with the after effects. So when I was in Iowa campaigning, a high school senior came up to me and he said, there are high school seniors in my school that have fentanyl patches and are addicted to opiates, and how can we get them treatment when they're afraid they're going to get sent to jail if they step up and say, I have a problem? And so when I saw this, I said, wow, we have to do more to help get treatment into the hands of that teenager's classmates. And I looked into international examples. There have been countries, including Portugal, that have decriminalized opiate use for personal use. And the way,
if I'm not mistaken, Portugal decriminalized all drugs. I might be wrong on that, but I think so. Maybe I should look it up after this.
They make that distinction is they say, if you have more than a week's supply of personal use, then we may treat you as a dealer or supplier or someone who's actually engaged in a criminal enterprise, and then it's illegal. But if we just catch you with a quantity that suggests that you are just using it personally, then instead of referring you to a jail cell, we refer you to treatment. And that is what we need to do right here in the United States.
So you want to
Okay, see, the great answer, right? The crowd liked it. It makes sense. It makes sense when he just says it, but then she's going to pull the H-bomb.
decriminalize small amounts of opioid use and possession. Does that include heroin?
Yes, it does.
This is such a fucking stupid question, okay? I was thinking about this earlier, and it's just like that. This is just a gotcha type question, or like feeding on the fears of Americans that don't know what the fuck they're talking about, frankly. Because if you're decriminalizing opioids, okay, if you're talking about prescription medications, then they were already decriminalized because these are prescription medications, assuming you have a prescription. So when you say decriminalize opioids, really what you mean is decriminalize heroin. That is basically what you mean. Also probably fentanyl and the other ones, although fentanyl is much more dangerous. But anyway, that question doesn't make sense. Okay, does that make sense what I was trying to say? Because if you're saying decriminalize opioids, that is what you're talking about, decriminalizing heroin.
We need to decriminalize opiates for personal use. And as you might not be surprised to hear from that, like I'm also for the legalization of cannabis. We need to remove that from the federal controlled substance.
He stumbled a little bit there. He needs to explain why yes, heroin. And again, decriminalization, not legalization. And basically the answer is just what he gave before. It's people can't come out for treatment. These people are sick. They're not going to be able to seek out treatment if they're afraid of being put into a fucking cage.
So cannabis and opioids, including heroin. Any other illegal drugs you want to decriminalize?
It would be the opiates.
See, she's trying to bait him because she knows this is like a hot topic. Americans' views on drugs on average are so bad.
That are the most common, which unfortunately right now include heroin and fentanyl.
What about cocaine?
What about cocaine? What about an extra? What about ketamine?
Cocaine it would not be on the list of substances I would engage in this because of the addiction has very different features.
Okay.
Yeah, he stumbled a little bit on those. He could feel the pressure.
Move on to our next topic.
Understandable. Try to, of course, if he can clean it up, that's always better.
Audience question. Let me bring in Justine Revelle. She is originally from North Carolina, is now studying law at Howard University. She also interns for Democratic Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. Justine.
Hi, Andrew. Many of America's biggest cities have undergone demographic and economic shifts under the wave of gentrification. The overflow of new grocery stores, restaurants, bars, and resources in general brings life and excitement to previously underserved communities. However, as these shifts occur, many longtime residents are forced out of their homes and, in the worst of cases, onto the streets. What policies would you promote for affordable housing?
Interesting question. Yeah, I like that she pointed to both of the sides of this gentrification question, because gentrification is another one of those like pretty complicated topics. It's not just a pure bad, because there are benefits as she noted, but of course there's also major cons. So let's see what he says.
It's a problem that American communities are struggling with around the country. And it's particularly bad in areas like DC, where the cost of housing has skyrocketed. There are a handful of super cities in the US where the cost of housing is shot up. Now, there are some things the federal government can do. A lot of it is around communities and municipalities because they have the most direct access to zoning ordinances. I would suggest that putting $1,000 a month into Americans' hands of portable income would make it so that people are much better able to find housing that works for them. You could even live with 4 or 5 of your friends or relatives, pool that income, and hopefully even maybe invest in a fixer-upper. So there's a lot we need to do. Certainly as president, I would invest in trying to increase the supply of affordable housing. Because right now there's a lot of NIMBYism where a lot of cities are like, hey, I love the idea of affordable housing, but if you try and build it around my rich people, then they'll get very upset, so I don't want to do it. So what we have to do is we have to lift some of the zoning restrictions on construction of affordable housing, and that would be a priority of mine as president.
I think that sounds good. Just quick with my own take here, I guess. I haven't looked into this that much, but to me, again, it's kind of the same sort of question of trying to address income and wealth inequality in the country as a whole, and there's many tools in the tool belt for that. So specifically here for housing, you could create more housing. I mean, I think that just makes a lot of sense to try to create more housing if you can, and there's clearly room for it in many of these cities. And then number 2, rent control. I know like economists freak out about this and conservatives freak out about that, but if it helps, I mean, honestly, I don't have strong opinions on that because I haven't seen the data, but those are at least 2 options.
This is Rachel May. She's a former elementary school teacher, now studies law at Howard University. Rachel?
Good evening. The United States stands as one of the most affluent nations in the world, and yet our education system consistently ranks near the bottom of the list of developed nations in the recent years.
Is that right? God, we're so stupid.
Teachers often bear the brunt of the blame for this phenomenon, and yet our country continues to pay them very, very low salaries. What is your plan for supporting our nation's teachers while promoting our academic success?
I wonder why is American education so bad? That's an interesting question, because it really is quite bad, and we're pretty freaking rich. So I don't understand, like, why is that? That's super weird.
Congratulations on being a school teacher and now going to law school. I mean, those are both tremendous careers. I think it's policy number 14 on my website, yang2020.com, is pay teachers more. And this is not a feel-good measure. This is an investment in ourselves. The data shows that a good teacher is worth his or her weight in gold in terms of the increased education outcomes for all of the children in their classrooms. And when you look at the data, teachers are the most important variable consistently.
Really?
The problem is that...
Okay, I guess Yang looked into it for me. Thank you, Yang. Is that true?
We run around and say, oh, I'm going to get some laptops in their hands. I'm going to, get a consultant. Like, they'll figure this out. It comes down to the teacher first and foremost. We need to attract and retain the best teachers we can find, and we will all be better off for it.
You say pay them more, but how much more?
Oh, well, it depends upon the environment and the context, but it's significantly more. I mean, most teachers have had marginal cost of living increases over the last number of years. I also want to follow up on this and say the data shows, and as a teacher, you probably know this, the data shows that about 75% of kids' academic performance is determined by non-school factors. So that's parent time, parent income, stress levels in the home, the type of neighborhood. So teachers are being put in an impossible position where we're paying them too little. We're saying educate our kids even though you can only control 25 to 30% of the educational outcomes, and they know this. So if we are serious about educating our children, we need to get money into the hands of the parents and families. If we put $1,000 a month in the hands of every parent, that's going to give the kids an honest chance to learn.
Okay, nice. I thought he was kind of contradicting himself for a second there, because he was saying that most 75% of it is not in the school. It's basically at home. And then he's saying, okay, and the policy is pay teachers more. When it's like, wait a second, what? That's only 25%. What about the majority of it? But then he goes, bam, UBI. That's where UBI comes in, addressing both sides. Yang 2020.
Stay with us. We'll be back with much more from CNN's Democratic presidential town hall with Andrew Yang.
I feel like so far he's almost done, and it's been pretty damn good. I think one slight stumble on the opioid thing, but I think the policy is correct. Again, I think he's probably not going far enough, in my opinion, but still like a very, very good policy. But besides that, I think quite strong. Yay!
Welcome back to CNN's live Democratic presidential town hall with Andrew Yang. Okay, so you've said as president, you would appoint a news and information ombudsman who would have the power to punish those who are seeking to misinform the American public.
So this whole issue, besides the specifics of the VAT and UBI and how it might be regressive, although I think Yang has addressed that, but I'd like to look into that further. Besides that issue, I think this is the most substantive criticism of Yang's policies that I've seen, at least, because it could definitely get pretty Orwellian if this whole thing is abused, at least the way I understood it from his policy page. So let's see what he says.
And you say there should be penalties for persistent and destructive misstatements that undermine public discourse. Do you really think you should police speech?
Well, right now we're on the verge of a very difficult time. So Americans can't trust what we see. And this is before deep fakes hit the internet, where they can literally just doctor it so you and I have a conversation and it seems like we're saying whatever it is they want us to say. And there are foreign actors that are maliciously actually corrupting our democratic processes and then frankly having a good laugh about it. Like on the other side of the world, they're investing a relatively modest sum of money and they're seeing it's causing havoc. So as a society, what is the greater danger here? Is the greater danger that we're just going to descend into cacophony and no one can even agree on the facts anymore?
What does cacophony mean?
Because in this day and age, it'd be extraordinarily hard for the government to somehow curb or censor in a systematic way. But we have to be able to sort out people who are maliciously informing the American people. And that, to me, is a much greater danger that we face right now.
How do you police it?
Well,
this is interesting.
I looked at what happens in other societies. And for example, in the UK, they have BBC. They have this committee. They have the equivalent of the ombudsman. And then you just file a complaint. And then they take it under review. And then they go to the news organization and say, hey, you need to issue a retraction, you need to issue an apology, and in some cases there are fines attached. So if they can do that, why can't we?
So are you specifically...
This is a really interesting issue because, I mean, obviously free speech has been such an important thing for America for such a long time. I mean, it's our first fucking amendment. And I think generally speaking, America has been right about this. It's actually, I think, one of the best things about America that we have such strong free speech laws as compared to most of Europe, say. But now we're getting, I mean, that has served us well for over 200 years, but now there's new factors. I'm just going to think out loud here, okay? Now there's new factors, technological factors like deepfakes, like, I mean, all of this, like the way fake news can propagate on social media. Should we change that, like, hardline stance on free speech? I don't know. It's just the downside is there's a big downside. Like I'm pretty certain that Yang would not abuse his power. But what if you get? I mean, just think about what if Trump had this power? What if somebody worse than Trump had this power? You know, you can all of a sudden label people and say, "Hey, they're fake news." They like literally say they're fake news, but not just say it, but have the power to take away resources from them, fine them, maybe even jail them. So obviously, that's incredibly potentially dangerous. Maybe it's worth it. I'm honestly not sure, but interesting question.
Talking about potentially penalizing news organizations.
Well, the vast majority of responsible news organizations would have absolutely nothing to worry about because it's not like CNN's going around like deliberately spreading misinformation about various individuals and organizations, but there are bad actors that are doing this very willfully and deliberately. So, you know, it would apply to CNN, but CNN would have no issue with this like 99.999% of the time.
I'd say 100%. This is your town hall. So let me bring in Zachary Israel. He works at a bipartisan consulting firm here in Washington.
All right, comments and see what they say. It needs to be unbiased somewhere, like a council of universities, colleges. You're talking about the free speech muds, but whatever that word is. Is that what you're talking about? Like have it be, oh geez, sorry guys. My setup is janky as fuck. Okay, interesting. So instead of it being, so instead of the government making these decisions, it's like another third party entity, like a university that's hopefully, or like a series of universities that's hopefully not biased and that can make the decisions instead, like that. That's interesting. Unfortunately, giving the government the ability to control public speech is a slippery slope. Yeah, that's definitely the fear. That's definitely the fear. And I mean, we've seen like a creeping of executive power in other areas already. You know, like with like the power to declare war. I mean, of course, that's supposed to be only by Congress. They're supposed to vote on that every single time. But then I don't know if it was under Bush Jr. or when exactly that happened, but it became that became eroded, and the executive branch became was able to do that like all willy-nilly, basically, without having to address the Congress for it. And then now it's, you know, it's to the extent that I think Obama, we had 7. Sorry. I'm trying to make sure I'm saying this correctly. I think 7 interventions under Obama, and then I think 9 now. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure about those numbers, but like many interventions without having approval from Congress. And so basically the slippery slope, like in action, as you're saying, and so yeah, it can be really dangerous, especially if you see like a president that, like if somebody really bad comes into power, like not even like Trump, because I think for the most part Trump, nothing like super bad has happened so far. We haven't gotten to World War III. We haven't gotten to a nuclear war or anything like that. It's like if like a Hitler type dude got into power, like fuck, dude,
He is the D.C. Young Democrats National Committee man. Zachary, what's your question?
Hi, Andrew. So my question is, why have you decided not to run for a lower political office other than for president, especially since there's so many other candidates running in the 2020 Democratic presidential primary who have significantly more political experience than you do?
This sounds like a hard question, but I think this is actually going to be a softball for Yang.
So imagine being the guy who'd gotten awards and accolades and had a movie made about his organization for helping create thousands of jobs throughout the Midwest and the South. And then realizing that you're pouring water into a bathtub that has a giant hole ripped in the bottom, and that we're in the process of automating away millions of American jobs, and the country cannot, for some reason, understand that it is not immigrants that are causing these dislocations, it is technology. Now, we do not have that much time. It's only 5 to 10 years before the truck driving gets automated away in significant ways. And so if you looked at that situation, you said, if I can help my country understand what is happening to it and advance meaningful solutions, then that's exactly what I'm going to do.
All right, our next guest.
That was like 85% of the way there. He didn't end it as strongly as I feel like he usually does. Almost had it, but close enough. It's still good. Let's see what else he said. Like federally ran, but ran independently. Yeah, that could be really interesting. Obviously, I have no idea how to actually implement this, but that idea sounds really interesting, yeah. Definitely not 100%. Was that for the Yang thing? Oh, for the CNN thing? Sort of like the Fed is a post op. Yeah, I thought of that as well. Yeah, that makes sense. 1984, yeah, dude. It could be really bad. We have to be really careful. I mean, technology in general is just making these questions a lot more, I don't know, pertinent, salient, like powerful. Phone distracting going off in the background, 85%. Yeah. Oh, did you hear that too? Like, I wasn't sure what that was. That's funny. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. One quick related thing. Obviously, I think overall the American experiment has gone really well. Like the laws that we created, like a constitution and amendments and all that stuff, are the institutions, the checks and the balances of power, right? Checks and balances. But things are changing really fast, and those rules were invented 250 years ago, for the most part, right? So. I'm torn between conserving the institutions that have worked for centuries now and addressing the new needs that are coming up, because we're probably going to have to adapt significantly. I mean, what's going to happen when somebody can produce audio or video that looks real? That's, I don't know. Deepfakes are not quite there yet. I've seen some of them. They look like they're 90% of the way, but you can still tell. What's going to happen? I don't know, dude. I'm scared.
Guest here is Luke Caruso. He's studying business at the George Washington University. Luke?
Hi, what are your thoughts on U.S. intervention?
Direct and to the point. I like that question. People ask questions, they take so long, so I like this guy.
So that's a very broad question.
I know. I'm referring more specifically. They told me not to edit it. I was going to specify more. I was referring more specifically to in the economic and foreign affairs of their nations, not just in the Middle East and South America, in Eastern Europe and elsewhere.
Is he going to talk about China here? I heard some people complaining about his stance on China. Let's see what he says.
So when you first asked intervention, what I thought of was military intervention. And if you look at our history of the last number of years, America has gotten itself enmeshed in conflicts. We've spent well over $1 trillion, closer to $2 trillion, cost thousands of American lives and tens of thousands of non-American lives, sometimes to very unclear gains. And so foreign policy and the standard for intervention under my presidency, first, I would push back the ability to declare war back to Congress where it belongs.
Yeah, we were talking about this. Yeah. I mean, I think that's definitely a good move. Yeah, that's top line. Let's go.
And second, I would be very judicious and restrained about intervening in other countries' affairs where if we go in significantly, there are going to be vital national interests at stake that we can achieve in a defined time frame.
You say we have diluted.
I almost 100% agree with that, but that ending part was pretty vague. Like national interest, what does that mean? Like I like what Kyle from Secular Talk, he always says this. He's like, no, only in self-defense. But I think in general, the only times where I would like at least think about it is if a genocide is taking place, then I'm like, I honestly don't know. Foreign policy, I'm not as strong on, so I'm not sure. But I would at least think about it if there was a legit genocide. Other than that, self-defense seems like the best way to go about it. Math, dude, that's another thing. What if, oh man, somebody disliked my stream? Oh, come on. What did you dislike about it? That's funny. It'll be so funny and awesome if somebody with a math hat and like crowds where data gets applause lines, or like where people applaud for data and numbers, like in his speeches. Like there was a Boston one, I think, recently where he said data, he said numbers, and the crowd like erupts in applause. It's fucking hilarious and like nerdy as fuck, but I love it. You know, it's like, if that guy becomes president, that's gonna be amazing.
We ourselves into thinking that we are capable of doing things that we are not.
Hey, sorry,
what are
national interests at stake that we can achieve in a defined time frame?
You say we have deluded ourselves into thinking that we are capable of doing things that we are not. What are the things the U.S. is not capable of doing?
I mean, regime change, obviously.
So what we are terrible at right now is rebuilding. And you don't have to look very far. You can just look at our own communities or even Puerto Rico. If the United States wanted to rebuild Puerto Rico, we don't even know how to do it. We would just cut a check to a group of private contractors who would siphon off some of the money to themselves and then hope for the best. So we have deluded ourselves going into other countries and saying we're somehow going to steward them into rebuilding, and we're terrible at it. And we need to own what we can do and cannot do. And that's one of the things I'll be very clear-eyed about as president.
Let me bring in Annalee Hughes. She's a student at the University of Maryland. She's been living with type 1 diabetes for 16 years. Annalee.
So many students.
Hi. So the rising cost of insulin, along with many other drugs that are necessary to sustain life, is a problem plaguing many Americans that live with chronic illnesses such as myself. So this has led to many people taking desperate measures, such as rationing insulin, that have led to death in many cases. So what will you do to combat this issue?
I have talked to dozens, maybe hundreds of Americans around the country who've had to make terrible, tragic, horrific choices where they're choosing between medicine and food or medicine and food for their children, and it has to stop. Now, one of the virtues of this Medicare for All plan is that if we expand public access, we can get the prices for insulin and other drugs way, way down. One of the things I would stipulate almost immediately as president is, look, you have to charge the American people the best price you are charging other people in other countries. Because there are times when they are charging us 10 times what they're charging people in another country. And how does that make sense? So we have to make it so that people like you do not have to make those sorts of choices. And obviously, if you have medicine you rely on, you should be getting that without having to strain yourself economically.
That was good. I mean, it's really immoral what we do with that. Like I'm not saying we should take out the entire profit motive, but because it's probably necessary in order to like invent these new drugs, right? But it's just price gouging what they're doing, and people die because of it. It's fucked up. I'm in the same boat. I'm generally non-interventionist, but I think there's a moral dilemma if like another Holocaust is happening. Yeah, exactly. Like if that was happening again today, are we just gonna say, oh, only in self-defense? Like that's pretty fucked up too. So yeah, I don't know. I think those get complicated, and I'm not really sure what my like hard answer is there. But yeah. Okay. Thanks for the comments. I appreciate the comments. It's fun to interact.
Charles Wilson is the chair of the D.C. Democratic State Committee, is an associate at a consulting firm. Charles, what's your question?
Good evening. What are your plans to address epidemics associated with people opting out of vaccines or anti-vaxxers?
Anti-vaxxers. Okay, let's see what he says.
Oh. Well, I'm a huge...
Man, as president, you have to have an answer for fucking everything. Jesus Christ.
I'm a huge...
Wait, sorry.
Plans to address epidemics associated with people opting out of vaccines or anti-vaxxers?
Oh, well, I'm a huge champion of science. My
science, fuck yes.
father's a PhD who generated 69 U.S. patents for GE and IBM, and some people have taken to calling my presidential campaign the revolution of reason. And so, if the
that's pretty awesome. If that's like that's catchy, and if that's actually true, which I hope it is, I think so. So far, so good. Then that's awesome.
Science holds, which it does, that vaccinating young children is vital for the public health, and we just need to do a better job at convincing parents that that's what they should do. The tough part here is that we're in an era of the collapse of institutional trust, where Americans do not trust. We don't trust our government.
Yeah, collapsing trust. Clap.
We don't.
Awkward clapping is really funny.
We don't trust the media. We don't trust the schools, and unfortunately, we don't trust doctors. And so when the doctor says, "Hey, get a vaccine," then parents are like, "You know what? I think I might not." And so there's this massive rebuilding of trust that we have to earn with the American people across many institutions, and unfortunately, our healthcare establishment is one of them.
Just a side note there. I don't know why I keep having that like caveat or whatever. Like I'm just gonna keep commenting. I think that also comes down to, or a big part of that, big driver of that, is our shitty education system. Because if you don't understand the science, or if you don't know about the science, and you can't know because you can't read studies and all the rest of it, then you just have to trust your doctor. And of course, if you're just trusting your doctor, sometimes your doctor is wrong. Sometimes your doctor is just an asshole. Or maybe you just, I don't know, for whatever reason, you got convinced by Facebook memes, you know? And so if people were better educated on in general, this kind of thing wouldn't happen. But yet another like negative externality from our shitty education system. I think my flux is turning on. 1 second. Yeah. Okay. You saw behind the curtain. Okay.
We're going to be right back. You can have a drink of water, stretch it out a little bit, because there's much more from CNN's Democratic Presidential Town Hall.
Okay, 5 minutes left. Focus. How do you say her name? Focus? Focaz? That's a weird name. Do you watch Destiny on Twitch or his YouTube? I think you'd like him. Watch him a long time. Yeah. I do like Destiny. I've watched him. I've seen. I like. Well, I got into him a lot more recently. I heard about him like a while ago, but I only started watching him a decent amount in the past like couple months or so. He's really good.
Welcome back to CNN's live Democratic Presidential Town Hall with Andrew Yang. And I want to bring in, wow, we've got a fired up crowd tonight. Philip Pennell is here with a question. He is the executive director for a nonprofit organization and active in the DC Democratic Party. Philip?
Good evening, Mr. Yang. As a gay African-American senior citizen who lives in the poorest ward in the District of Columbia, I am intimately and acutely aware of what it means to be marginalized and neglected. Being a resident of our nation's capital also makes me a second-class citizen because DC has no voting representation in our national legislature. Do you support statehood for the District of Columbia, which has more residents than Wyoming and Vermont?
You can tell that's going to be a popular question here in D.C., but I'm 100% for D.C. statehood. You should have been a state a long time ago. And I'm also for Puerto Rican statehood, which is also long overdue. And, and one of it's like a statement I make is that if Puerto Ricans looked like Swedes, they would have been Americans a long time ago.
I wonder if that's true. Do you think that's true? Obviously, it's like a unfalsifiable thing. I mean, it probably would have helped, right? But it's possible to know.
I want to bring in Kishan Putta. He lives here in Washington, and he works in healthcare. Kishan?
Yes, thank you. And I'm also the chair of the DC Democrats Asian Pacific Islander Caucus. So thanks for being here. It's actually my 45th birthday today. Nice to spend it with everyone here today. And you. My question is...
Reddit called this guy out for like spending airtime on calling out his own birthday, which is pretty funny.
How can we encourage more Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders to get involved in public affairs and to seek leadership roles in government and politics? And thanks for running.
Let me guess, he's going to say, well, hopefully my candidacy will help inspire people. And then maybe he'll say something else as well.
Oh, thank you. It's a massive challenge because right now Asian Americans vote, donate, and run for office at lower levels than other parts of the population. And certainly growing up as a skinny Asian kid, my parents weren't like, ooh, you're going to run for president someday. Like that was not the conversation. It was doctor, lawyer, and then the list stopped, more or less. So we certainly have to do more to show Asian Americans that we need to step up. We need to give back to this country that has done so much for us. And I'm optimistic that my run for the presidency will help make that case.
Bam, told you.
To people around
I mean, it was an easy one.
Country.
Okay. Comment? Oh, yeah. Hello.
You mentioned
Here, we'll just finish the last 2 minutes and then we'll go.
your parents never imagined you running for president. I understand when you told your mother you were going to run for president, her reaction was,
I think
that's
it was
nice.
Yeah, it was like, that's nice. Can you pass the salt? I think something along those lines.
That's really funny.
What does she think now?
Oh, now she loves it. Now she's very excited about it. But there was a period when my family was, I think, I wouldn't say, they were concerned was the word I'd use, or anxious. Because many parents, you'd be anxious if one of your children decided to do something at that level. But now I have no bigger fans than Mama and Papa Yang.
What, and you said Papa Yang too. What does he say?
Well, he tells me to stay strong, stay healthy, be good to his grandsons, and try and be home every chance I get.
And what is the best advice you've received from your parents about running for president?
Well, they said to be true to yourself and just make the case to the American people about why you're honestly running. And then the American people will then see that motivation and then help us hopefully evolve to the next version of our economy to really rise to the challenges of the 21st century.
All right, Andrew Yang, thank you for being
thank
here.
you. It was so much fun.
I want to listen to that last part one more time.
And then help us hopefully just make the case to the American people about why you're honestly running. And then the American people will then see that motivation and then help us hopefully evolve to the next version of our economy to really rise to the challenges of the 21st century.
All right, Andrew Yang, thank you for being
thank
here.
you. It was so much fun.
Thank you, great studio audience, and all of you at home. Be sure to tune in a week
nobody cares.
tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern here on CNN for 5 back-to-back Democratic
5 in a row? Oh my goodness. Monday, April 22nd. Interesting. Do you guys know why Pete is getting so much press? He's not even, as far as I can tell, he doesn't even have any policies. I don't understand. I feel like corporate media is just kind of just picking random people almost. Not random, but like Kamala, Pete, Buttigieg, and then a couple other ones too. Because I feel like they're doing an investment strategy of diversification because they don't know who's gonna win. So they're like O'Rourke, Kamala, Buttigieg, Biden, right? Can't forget Biden. Okay, let's see. Let's look at some comments. Cool. I've watched it for years. Yeah, it's pronounced Focus. Oh, that makes sense. Okay, cool. Yeah, Destiny seems really cool. Do you play any video games? Have you thought about playing games and talking politics? M said. I do play video games for fun. Mostly, I'm not that good. I play Melee mostly nowadays. I'm not sure how that would work. But interesting idea. Like on Twitch? Hi, regarding interventions, not sure where I draw the line, but personally, I would, for example, be happy about U.S. intervening against ISIS, even if they didn't commit genocide, which they did. Was a relatively cheap intervention, and probably they could have been beaten faster if the intervention ramped up sooner. Yeah, I mean, ISIS is pretty fucking bad, so that can make some sense. Yeah, I'm honestly not sure. It sounds like a really hard thing to figure out, because you have to weigh like the pros and cons and like the secondary effects and things like that. And I just I'm not well versed in that area. I'm not sure. M. Santo. How do you say your name? Is M. Santo okay? There's an important difference in my mind between intervention areas where there is already war and the destabilization of currently stable regimes. Like there's a bigger downside risk to going for currently stable regimes. I assume. Is that it? So, until you have to be a $9. Pete is a corporate candidate, yeah. Your product judge Biden. Do you play Apex? No, I don't. Some of my friends do. It seems really popular now. It's like the new Fortnite or something. I'm pretty into, like, I know a good amount about gaming. And I've been into gaming for a long time. I was part of a gaming channel for a while. Sorry if you hear my heater. I forgot to turn that off. But we finished the town hall, and I gotta walk my dog soon. Like I probably should go. I feel like overall though he did quite well. I was reading. I read some of the Reddit comments about the town hall after it happened, and some of the people were saying like it was like kind of meh. I feel like overall that was actually quite good. I'm glad I watched it myself because, you know, it's always better to just get it firsthand and see what you think, because the hive mind isn't always correct, right? So, yeah, I think overall quite good. A couple stumbles maybe. I think the opiate question again, I pretty much 100% agree with this policy, but maybe a bit of a stumble on the question because she kind of like she baited him a little bit with the heroin question, like because it sounds really bad, right? And to the general American public, that sounds terrible. But I think besides that, it was quite good. Like his answers were good substantively, and then also I think he came off well. You know, he was making some jokes, like the high fives with the crowds, things like this. The crowd seemed to like him. So overall positive, I think. We did it. 8.5 out of 10. Yeah, I was something like that. I wasn't sure what to get. I was gonna give him a grade. It was gonna be like A- maybe, and then his Asian parents are gonna be like, not good enough. It's okay, I'm half Asian, so it's fine. But yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I don't know. I guess I should go soon, or like now. Oh, geez, sorry. But that was quite good. Let's see. I feel like I want to say something else. Actually, let's check something. Let's check Yang's state. Oops, I almost closed that. Check. Like where he's at here in the election betting odds. If you guys aren't aware, there's a like prediction markets on these on the presidential election, which is really awesome. And this one. I get a little bit confused because this is supposed to be from these two sites, but these two sites are maybe it's because it combines. But this site, I think it was this one, generally thinks much more highly of Yang than this website does. Okay, so about the same. So it seems like, at least according to this prediction market, nothing really changed. Nothing much changed after CNN Town Hall, which is like, okay, we'll take it. It's still a big number, guys. Fun chatting. Yeah, fun chatting with you guys. Thank you so much for watching and chatting. It's really awesome. Thank you. Thank you. I'll try to keep it up. Okay. Let's not make this goodbye too long. Okay. It gets awkward after that. All right. All right. Have a good night, guys. Bye.